Fellow Disciples by Victor Yap and Doris Mock. Chapter 9. What goes up must come down. Luke chapter 9, verses 28 to 36. In the year 1271, Marco Polo, the 17-year-old Italian explorer, merchant, and adventurer, crisscrossed Asia with his father and uncle, subsequently chronicling his 24 years' adventure in a book. Marco Polo made history in China, where he befriended the great Kublai Khan, who eventually appointed him as his ambassador to Europe. Marco was about 20 or 21 when he reached Cathay, North China, and for the next 17 years, the Polos reportedly even lived in the emperor's dominions. Polo claimed to have been the governor of Yangzhou for 3 years. Polo's claims, however, invited a storm of controversy and a barrage of criticism from those not familiar with the exploration and discovery of the New Worlds. His account, details, and memory of the trip were often questioned and ridiculed. He did not help matters by keeping quiet on his return home. Some argue that he never went to China at all, noting that he failed, among other things, to mention the breathless sight of the Great Wall, the use of tea and chopsticks, and the ideographic script of the Far East, and that contemporary Chinese records show no trace of Polo. As 70-year-old Polo neared death in 1324, his patchy reputation had suffered untold damage. Even his friends begged him to recant and to withdraw the stories he had told about the lands of the Far East, including China, India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and Japan. But to his last breath, Polo insisted, "I did not write half of what I saw." Walter L. Liefeld said that the Transfiguration is the most significant event between Jesus' birth and his passion. It occurs around the time he was going to Jerusalem. God's glory is the single most covered attribute of God in the Bible, a few times more than his love, mercy, or forgiveness. The noun glory is mentioned 200 times in the Old Testament and 163 times in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, the priests could not continue to minister when the Lord's glory filled the house of God. Exodus 40:34, 1 Kings 8:11, 2 Chronicles 5:14, and 2 Chronicles 7:2. Why is God described as glorious in the Bible? How should we respond to his glory? First, look to him. There is no clearer vision. Luke chapter 9, verses 28 to 32. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. When my wife and I had a discussion on Moses and Joshua, I asked her if she had to choose between Moses or Joshua, who would she prefer to be? For me, I definitely did not want to be in Moses' shoes or have his responsibilities. Further, Joshua entered the promised land, but Moses did not. However, she said without hesitation, "Moses." I asked, "Why?" She said Moses was the only person to see God's glory. I raised the stakes and said, "How about Moses and Abraham, the father of faith, but she still answered Moses. Again, the answer was Moses saw God's glory. What is the one thing you want to see most of all? The greatest sight of all is not the seven wonders of the world, the glory of the kingdoms of the world that Satan proposed, Matthew 4:8, the greatest skyscrapers of the world, or the most scenic places in the world. Jesus gave us a preview to beholding his glory in heaven. What the disciples saw that day was incredible, incomparable, and indescribable. It was a spectacular, captivating, and amazing sight, experience, and discovery for the disciples. Peter, James, and John woke up to a stunning, dazzling, and breathtaking phenomenon. Jesus' face, appearance, and bodily form had changed, and it literally lit up the place, the skies, and the mountain like flashlights, spotlights, and floodlights illuminating a studio all at once. His clothes were as bright as a flash of lightning, or literally in various passages white and starry. The only time the word is recorded in the Bible, Luke 9:29, white as light or false, Matthew 17:2, and whiter than anything on earth, Mark 9:3. Matthew 17:2 and Mark's Gospels 9:2 tell us that Jesus was metamorphed or transfigured or changed. But Luke alone specifically reveals that what the disciples saw in Jesus altered, verse 29, or, more precisely, other, heterox in Greek. Appearance was God's glory, verse 32. The three apostles saw, felt, and experienced who Jesus was, the Lord of glory, 1 Corinthians 2:8 and James 2:1. His glorious riches, Philippians 4:19, glorious might, Colossians 1:11, and eternal glory, 2 Timothy 2:10. Hebrews 1:3 says, "The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word." According to John's Gospel, Jesus mirrored the glory of the Father, 1:14, the glory that he had with the Father before the world began, 17:5. The presence of Moses and Elijah was odd and unexpected, but their presence was necessary to confirm, record, and declare the glory of God's presence. Readers know that Moses certainly saw God's glory, Exodus 33:22. But Elijah did not quite experience God's glory up front in that sense or in the same language. So why was Elijah here? They shared a common experience in that both Moses and Elijah saw the Lord passed by, Exodus 34:6 and 1 Kings 19:11. So Elijah and Moses were qualified and invited to witness, cheer, and authenticate the fullness of Jesus' divinity, the splendor of his glory, and his power, majesty, and honor. The next amazing discovery was that Jesus' glory was ever bright, outshining and outlasting Moses and Elijah's glory. The appearance and presence of Elijah and Moses were astonishing, electrifying, and overwhelming, but their conversation was not about how they both lived, served, or ended, but about the death of Jesus. Jesus' death in Jerusalem was a glorious fulfillment of his prediction, John 18:32, Scripture, Matthew 26:54, and God's plan of redemption, Luke 2:38. Moses, who represented the law, and Elijah, the prophets, were two of a kind in Jewish history. Not only did they dramatically experience the Lord passing by, their miracles were unsurpassed and their lives ended in a mysterious, suspenseful, and tricky manner. Moses was vigorous when he died on Mount Nebo on the verge of the Promised Land, Deuteronomy 32:49 and 34:5-7. And Elijah was not at a dying age when he was translated to heaven, 2 Kings 2:11. But as Luke 9:33 indicated, they were mere men, Luke 9:33. Their glorious splendor faded, Luke 9:32, and they vanished like smoke or vapor, ducking out of sight and disappearing into thin air. What an interesting commentary on Moses and Elijah's life, the fleeting nature of life, and the fate of all humankind. Second, live for him. There is no clearer venture. Luke 9:33. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what he was saying. Long ago, the mice had a general council to consider what measures they could take to outwit their common enemy, the cat. Some said this, and some said that. But at last a young mouse got up and said he had a proposal to make, which he thought would meet the case. "You will all agree," said he, "that our chief danger consists in the sly and treacherous manner in which the enemy approaches us. Now, if we could receive some signal of her approach, we could easily escape from her. I venture, therefore, to propose that a small bell be procured and attached by a ribbon around the neck of the cat. By this means we should always know when she was about, and could easily retire while she was in the neighborhood." This proposal met with general applause until an old mouse got up and said, "That is all very well, but who is to bell the cat?" The mice looked at one another, and nobody spoke. Peter had no interest, motivation, attraction, stomach, urgency, and timeline to leave the peak and labor for souls. Whether Peter understood it or not, meant it or not, knew it or not, his proposal of permanent or temporary separation was emphatically rejected by the Lord, even though his idea made good sense and benefited everyone. If Jesus remained on the mountain, he would not need to suffer, bleed, and die in Jerusalem. The disciples' retirement benefits would then include a cabin in the mountain, a room with a view and a front seat to a first-class spectacle. However, Peter's "let us make" exhortation was radically opposed to Jesus' mission in life, Matthew 17:4 and Mark 9:5. Jesus' group exhortation to his disciples in the Gospels was always, "Let us go," Mark 4:35 and John 14:31, as typified by Mark 1:38, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." When Lazarus was dead, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go to him," John 11:15. Though the Jews attempted to stone him, he said to his disciples' consternation, "Let us go back to Judea," John 11:7-8. And shortly later, even when he knew he was betrayed, he said, "Let us go," and rose to meet Judas, his betrayer, Mark 14:42 and Matthew 26:46. In fact, the only time Jesus did not say, "Let us go," he said, "Let us leave," John 14:31. The Bible did not tell us that Jesus' suffering was glorious. No suffering is pretty. Jesus, however, was crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death for everyone. Hebrews 2:9 and 1 Peter 1:11. Further, Jesus had no need for a tabernacle. He was the greater and more perfect tabernacle of God. Hebrews 9:11-12 and Revelation 21:3, who tabernacled or dwelt among us. John 1:14. Are you in retirement mode, in active service? Are you sick and tired of the same old, same old? Would you rather go golfing, fishing, or bowling? Well, don't be. Rise up to be the good, faithful, and wise servant God intends for us to be. The third amazing thing was a voice from heaven that commanded the disciples to hear Jesus, follow instructions, and be obedient. Third, listen to him. There is no clearer voice. Luke chapter 9, verses 34-36. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and told no one at that time what they had seen. Don't you think obedience is harder to accept and learn as one ages? That's why it is said it is hard to teach old dogs new tricks. Obedience school is the hardest and most costly school to learn. A dog obedience trainer via the website charges $898 for learning how to influence dog behavior using conditioning and reinforcement, house training, crate training, hunting training, and basic veterinary issues, and how to deal with behavior problems and teach competition obedience. A dog trainer said a lot of puppies' behavior will be determined in their first 16 weeks. A typical class is an hourly session that runs once a week for 8 weeks. A dog has to learn how to stop, sit, lay, and stay, and even behaviors like digging, barking, chewing, and biting. Surprisingly, owners are expected to go through the total 8 hours with their pets. Obedience is a disciple's first lesson, continuing education, and ultimate test in life. It is a hard lesson and a thorough education, but a necessary and effective skill and habit to learn for Christian living. Why do we obey him? Peter concluded elsewhere in his epistle, "For he received honor and glory from God the Father when the voice came to him from the majestic glory, saying, 'This is my Son, whom I love, with him I am well pleased.' We ourselves heard this voice that came from heaven when we were with him on the sacred mountain." 2 Peter 1:17-18. Because of Jesus' humility and obedience to death on a cross, God has exalted him to the highest place and given him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Philippians 2:8-11. Peter, the apostle who spoke most extensively of Jesus' glory, described his honor and glory as forever, eternal, 1 Peter 4:11, 5:10, 5:11, and 2 Peter 3:18, and majestic, 2 Peter 1:17. The passage began with Jesus talking with Moses and Elijah and standing with them, verse 32 in Greek, but ended with two forceful statements, again in Greek, emphasizing Jesus first and Jesus alone. This is a repetition of the words of Jesus' baptism, Matthew 3:17, Mark 1:11, and Luke 3:22, with a stunning addition and riveting climax, him here verse 35, and then Jesus monos, verse 36. Here is an imperative. It is required and not revisable. Moses and Elijah were two of the greatest figures in Israel's history. Moses was rightly the founder of ancient Israel. He single-handedly brought Israel out of slavery. God himself buried Moses, Deuteronomy 32, verses 49 to 50, and Deuteronomy 34:7. Elijah did not die. He was translated and his body was not found. However mighty, godly, and imposing Moses and Elijah were, they were tired souls with human weakness, and not the objects of our obedience. Moses, Numbers 11:15, and Elijah, 1 Kings 19:4, asked to die out of desperation, a sense of failure, and not an act of faith, courage, or triumph. Conclusion. Today we experience and manifest God's glory unlike Old Testament people or the New Testament disciples. We see God's glory in nature, humankind, and in the Son, Jesus Christ. The Bible tells us that God's glory is great, Psalm 138, verse 5, above the heavens, Psalm 8:1, and over all the earth, Psalm 57:5 and 72:19. We were created for God's glory, Isaiah 43:7. However, we fell short of God's glory, Romans 3:23, but Jesus Christ has made known to us the riches of his glory, Romans 9:23. Christ's presence in us is the hope of glory, Colossians 1:27. In him we have received a rich and glorious inheritance, Ephesians 1:18. People have drawn paintings, built buildings, and composed music for the glory of God. Even routine, unexciting, and taxing things like studying, working, child rearing, and chores. How about you? Have you given God the glory due his name? Psalm 29:2, 96:8. Done all things for the glory of God, 1 Corinthians 10:31. Declared his glory among the nations and his marvelous deeds among all peoples, Psalm 96:3. We look forward to Jesus' second coming when he will appear in the sky and ride the clouds, Matthew 24:30-31, in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels, Luke 9:26. Until then, are you teachable, willing to learn, make yourself count? Are you willing to seek his will, do his will no matter how hard, and submit your will to his will? Bible study questions. 1. What did Jesus take Peter, James, and John to do? Verse 28. 2. When Jesus prayed, what changes occurred to him? Verse 29. 3. When Jesus prayed, who talked with him? What were they talking about? What was Jesus to accomplish? Verses 30-31. 4. What were Peter and the other disciples doing? Verse 32. Why? 5. What suggestion did Peter give? Verse 33. Why did he propose such? Why did text say he did not know what he was saying? 6. What did the disciples see and hear? How did they feel? Who did they hear speaking? What was God's command? Verse 35. 7. After this, why did the disciples not mention what they saw, nor tell anyone? 8. What important revelation occurred at the Mount of Transfiguration? Contrast. 1. Jesus' identity. 2. His mission. 3. The lesson for us. And 4. Others. Application. Personal devotional reflections. 1. Do you have a spiritual experience that deepens your understanding of the Lord, His attributes, and God's glory? How many times have you experienced it? Is it regular? What kind of experience is it? 2. If you were Peter, James, and John, would you want to build 3 tabernacles in the mountains and remain together with Jesus, Moses, and Elijah? Why? Is this God's will for the disciples? 3. Once you descended the mountain, can you bring the special mountain spiritual experience to the reality of everyday living? If it is difficult, what is the reason or what are the obstacles? How can we, as disciples, obey Jesus? 4. Write down how you can be a disciple, follow and obey Jesus' footsteps. Small group sharing and activities. 1. Share from the second question. If you were Peter, James, and John, would you want to build 3 tabernacles in the mountains and remain there with Jesus, Moses, and Elijah? Why? 2. Share a way in your ordinary life you can obey the Lord. In 1 minute. After each study, always encourage members to share one lesson learned about being Jesus' disciple or one act to practice as his disciple.